Robb Wolf, how the heck are you? It's good to see you.
Good, man. Good. Everything is quite good. I'm very, very lucky to be here, and in particular, spending some time with you. We don't get to hang out a lot, so I'm stoked to be here.
I know, dude. I've known you since we both were in college, and as we both kind of got into the health and wellness scene from different angles, we become friends over the years and have stayed in touch. The big reason I wanted to have you on today is, man, you've done so many different things. I mean, you're New York Times bestseller. You were doing podcasting before podcasting was popular. You had one of the most popular podcasts. You were a part of like this massive juggernaut called CrossFit. And then you kind of pivoted into some other things, and then you got into like sustainability and like actually educating people that having like a farm that's actually regenerative might be good for the environment, which a lot of people don't understand, which blows my mind. But we are living in interesting times. And
Right.
then you've become a business owner. You started, so you've been a gym owner, you've been an entrepreneur, you've doing all these things plus balancing a family. And I think this podcast, the Vitality Brotherhood, or the community that I'm building, is really for 40 and up men. And a lot of times guys hit their 40s and they've either they've let their health go, they've they've had a bad, something's gone on with a relationship or a family issue, and everything kind of falls apart. And so I think for having somebody like you who's been on like the cutting edge of most of the major healthy trends in the last 2 decades, hearing about some of the behind the scenes struggle, really kind of helps guys be like, yeah, well, like, having success. Like, I think one of the big drawbacks of the internet is they only see the success. They don't see the behind the
Right.
scenes struggle. Talk about, like, I met you originally when you were in college through Danny Thurman, Gold's Gym, Redding, California. I was
Yeah.
going to Shasta College. You're this kind of like sciencey guy who's playing around with powerlifting. Um, at what point did you kind of like understand that you were kind of going to end up doing a lot of stuff on internet and you're going to become an author? Did you even did that even come into your mind?
No, I mean, I did an undergrad in biochemistry. I got a bug in my bonnet to go to medical school, and it's kind of funny because I went to California State University, Chico, small liberal arts college, did a chemistry undergrad, and was pretty good at it. Like, I really enjoyed chemistry. I got pretty good at it. Uh, and my professors knew me far better than I knew myself at that time. And I remember I had mentioned that I wanted to go to med school and was applying and doing that whole rope-a-dope. And one day I was teaching a lab class for nursing students, and at the end of the class, all of my professors, like the core group of kind of organic synthetic chemists, which was kind of the direction that I had mainly focused on, they came and they're like, "Hey, we want to take you to lunch." And I'm like, "Oh, okay, cool." And we did that not infrequently. It was a small school, and you go out and get some food and get some beer with your professors, which I think was a really cool aspect of going to a small school. But this was a little different. Usually it's like a group of people, and this was just the professors and myself. And they basically sat me down and they're like, "Listen, you're going to like medical school. You're going to hate being a doctor. Like, you're just going to hate it. We know your personality. You
Hmm.
don't color within the lines well. You don't deal with structure well." And this was 95 through like kind of 98 that all this was playing out. And so way before like the EMRs, like the electronic medical record stuff, and um, it was a much better environment to be a doctor then than what I would say it is now. But they were absolutely prescient in that and right. But I didn't listen to them. I
Hmm.
went and got myself into a program, was sleeping like 3 hours a night. I was doing a vegan diet at the time. I lived in
Hmm.
Seattle, and this absolutely the totality of this thing absolutely tanked my health. I also caught Giardia while in Mexico, and I think
Good
that
times.
was the thing that just absolutely crippled me. And
So
so I ended up with
was the vegan thing to impress a chick?
the vegan thing was just no, to some degree, yes, because there were a lot of hot vegan girls there. But I had done diabetic wound care on my dad. You know, my dad was a
Oh,
pack
okay.
a day smoker, and 20 years of
Mhm.
diabetes. My mom never ended up losing limbs like my dad did, but she was a
Yeah,
pack a day smoker for 40 years, and both of them had horrible health issues. And I just didn't want that, so I was kind of
yeah,
casting around trying
yeah,
to find what the right thing was to do. It was kind of hip and cool to be vegan in a college, and there were five
yeah.
gals for every one dude at school, and so that was the, that put some spit polish on the decision for sure. But really, it was trying to be healthy. And this was one
Sure.
of those things where I should have seen what was happening to me. I'm probably 170 pounds right now. I'm not a big guy, but I got down to 125, 130 pounds following this vegan diet. And it was everything. It was the lack of sleep, the lack of
Yeah,
circadian biology, super stressed out, but it was absolutely a perfect storm. And developing ulcerative colitis, I almost died from it. They wanted to put me on immunosuppressant drugs. I was facing surgery, and I knew enough about those options that it's not great long-term, prognosis with that. So,
mhm.
kind of in desperation, I was casting around looking at different stuff, and I found, of all things, an Atkins book. And I started thumbing
Yeah,
through the Atkins book. And funny enough, he mentioned a ton of things about like gut issues resolving with low carb diets and
mhm.
inflammation. And most of that book was written in the 80s. This maybe had been updated from the 90s, but this was a long time ago. Like the concept
Sure.
of like a paleo diet, which is what I eventually kind of went into. There were maybe like 300 people in the world that even knew what that term was.
Yeah,
And so in desperation, I embarked on this low carb, paleo, ketogenic type diet. And it was miraculous for me, just in
yeah.
so many problems, largely avoiding immunogenic foods. I have celiac also, so I had that gluten
Sure.
intolerance piece. But it pretty well saved my life, but the rest of my life was in a shambles. I had to drop out of school. I was broke. It's funny, I made more money working at Whole Foods as a supplement buyer for their nutrition department than I did doing bench chemistry at the Fred Hutch Cancer Research Center. So, I kind of
Of
had
course.
both of those gigs going on and wasn't totally sure what I was going to do because I didn't, it became pretty obvious that medicine wasn't probably a good fit for me. I was still pretty sick, even though my health was improved. I just didn't feel like I had the chutzpah to go through a graduate program. And so I was still
Mhm.
trying to figure out what the next step was. And the internet was in its nascent stage. This is like 2000, 2001 by this point. And I was casting around, looking at different diet related stuff, and this weird workout hit my radar called CrossFit. And back in those
Yeah,
early days, they did this throughout their history, but they would get these really interesting links. They linked to this guy Arthur Devaney, who was early in the paleo diet movement. They seemed very savvy about the benefits of lower carb diets for diabetes and different conditions. The workout seemed kind of wacky, but I appreciated what they were doing. And so I started working out with this guy Dave Warner, and we started doing this CrossFit stuff, and we really enjoyed it. We
yeah.
converted his 2-car garage into a gym, probably one of the first garage gyms that ended up emerging as a consequence of CrossFit. And Dave and I, after about 3, 4 months of doing this, like we had 10, 12 people that we started training. They were like, hey, what is
Yeah.
this stuff you're doing? Like, you look really good. You seem really happy with it. And so we started talking about the potential of opening a proper commercial facility. And we reached out to the Glassmans and asked if we could open a spot and call it CrossFit. And I still have the letter somewhere. It was pretty cool. It was back when Greg
Yeah.
was he's always been brilliant, but there was a time when he was both brilliant and quite generous and giving.
Yeah.
And he was like, "Yeah, go be achieved, do this thing. We've been thinking about affiliates. We would be honored to have you guys as our first affiliate." So that was CrossFit North in Seattle. I had the good fortune of getting introduced to a guy that's now a dear friend and has been a jiu-jitsu coach for 20 years, John Frankel. And he had just finished
Mm-hmm.
his PhD at Harvard, and he had a black belt, and he wanted to open MMA school, but he wanted some CrossFit attached to it. And so we
Sure.
opened what was then the fourth CrossFit affiliate in the world, CrossFit NorCal Strength and Conditioning in Chico, California.
Mm-hmm.
John figured out that he didn't like running a gym full time. His PhD from Harvard could facilitate some potentially more interesting things. So he actually moved to Seoul, Korea, and has been a
Mm-hmm.
professor there. So we had to figure out how to stand up this business and get it going. And this is when I met my now wife, Nikki, and she was foolish enough
Yes.
to help me start running this thing. And yeah, so I mean, that's kind of a long arc, of
Sure.
a health crisis, investigating some nutrition stuff, getting involved in that early CrossFit scene, and then opening the first and fourth CrossFit gyms in the world.
Yeah. It's interesting. You and I have a lot in common. We both have the, parents that aren't healthy. We both have the colitis as like a come to Jesus meeting. And we both have to learn the hard way. Like it's not, we're not one of these people that are, people give us advice. We just kind of like, okay,
We're
whatever.
experiential
And then it's
learners,
like full throttle. And we have to learn through crashing the car. So
right?
when you guys are riding this CrossFit wave, and you guys have got NorCal Strength and Conditioning, and CrossFit is just like the thing, and you're doing these seminars, and did you ever think that was going to end? Because I remember you talking about how this is the perfect situation to have like almost like a offbeat medical practice to actually really help people
Mm-hmm.
combine workout. And on a side note, when I met you, we kind of, well, I met you years ago, but when we reconnected through, meeting each other at some of the Paleo FX stuff, we got like Joel Jameson, Mike Robertson, myself, Molly Galbraith, and I can't remember who else
Kiefer,
was involved, but
yeah.
in this thing, yeah, Kiefer, and in this boot camp in a box thing, where
Mm-hmm.
basically we took like, you guys had your on ramp where you're actually teaching people. Molly and I would advertise as a boot camp, and then they bring them into the gym, and actually we would basically trick them into doing a strength training program instead of just beating the crap out of them, right? And you did the
Right.
nutrition, Joel brought the HRV, Mike brought the exercise library, and I did the programming. It was this kind of collaboration of everything, right? And I think that's kind of what you wanted in CrossFit instead of just wearing people out. When that was booming, did you think that was what you were going to be doing for like 20, 30, like this is what you were going to do? Or did you kind of in the back of your head, you were kind of like, I don't know, like, is this going to be it? Or is there going to be something else? Like when that wave was peaking and riding, what were your thoughts at that time?
Man, we were so early. Like, again, we opened our gym January of 2003. So that
Yeah.
fourth gym. So CrossFit was actually ages away from being a brand name, a topic of common
Right.
conversation. So we had to work like crazy to get people
Yeah.
in the gym because they were like, why would I go to you guys? You don't have a pool, you don't have a sauna, like it's kind of dirty in here.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so we had been just like grinding it out for about a year. And I mean like 5:30 a.m. classes, running them all day, 9 o'clock class, rinse, rather, repeat. In between the times that we weren't coaching, we worked a physical therapy job just to keep the bills paid. And Nikki and I, we still are our first 2 years in business. We made together less than $10,000 a year total. And most of that just
Yeah.
got folded back into the gym. We had a one-bedroom apartment that was like $400 a month. We had two cars that thankfully didn't break, because if they broke, we would have had no money to pay
Right.
for them. But there was this one day where we had a pretty good sized class. We had maybe like 25 people in there. It's a pretty good sized class, but we were still just like struggling. Like we
Yeah.
there were periods where There weren't people in there. And I went through our waivers. We would have people come in and do a one free class. We had over 1,000 waivers, and we had fewer than 100 people. And I was just like,
Wow.
what the fuck? This isn't going to work. And Nikki had an economics degree. And so she sat down and did this spreadsheet, basically input like the velocity of people that we had coming in and then the churn. And she kind of did this analysis, and she was basically like, if you are just doing kind of like like the $99 a month unlimited classes, this rate of churn, you've got this many people in your community, within 2 years you're bankrupt because you've churned through everybody who would ever come to your gym and you've made no money whatsoever. And so we were just like, okay, we've got to do something different. And Mind Body Online was still very tight in the yoga scene. Like that's really who they catered to initially. So we went and did a business seminar with them, and it was like we got to sit down with some people where they just looked at everything they were doing. And they said, you need a beginner's class, you need to be doing one-on-one coaching, one-on-one up to maybe 1-on-4 small groups. This beginner's class should probably happen as like a flight of people. It's got a beginning date, an end date. Everybody goes through it, kind of like going through buds or something like that. And so we started doing that, and it was still hard, but then we started making some decent money, and we just continued to really double down on that quality. And we very quickly realized that for the common person coming through the front door, they didn't need barbell lifts. They didn't need a ton of these things. Maybe someday they would do those, but we developed this thing called the on-ramp, and then we had a level 1, level 2, level 3. Eventually, like when the CrossFit Games became an entity, we developed a competition class. We realized that people love the community, but they hate coming in last. And so we developed this program called LIFT, Low Intensity Functional Training, which really wasn't that low intensity, but we just didn't record anything on the board, and so we would have a workout, and we would do a dedicated strength and mobility session, and then kind of a metabolic circuit. And we shifted more towards things like sleds and dragging tires and stuff like that, kind of big macro movements, push-ups, body rows. And eventually, if people felt froggy, then we would start working on the barbell lifts, starting with squatting and deadlifting and pressing, and then eventually Olympic lifts and stuff like that. And we were picked as one of Men's Health's top 30 gyms in America. It was a very successful business, back before 2010, and then from like 2008 to 2014, when CrossFit got so big that it became commoditized, and it was difficult to compete. Everybody was competing on price, but the gym would clear revenue wise over $100,000 a month. Like it did well. You don't have a lot of margin left, but we paid our trainers well. We encouraged them to develop really robust personal training practices, and then they would also coach group classes to kind of normalize everything. But we figured out some pretty good systems, and we really tried to go back and share that with the CrossFit community. And this is what got us ironically in trouble. And this is an opinion piece, but I really think that this is true, is that Glassman figured out early on that poorly run gyms were great for his side of the business model. And his side of the business model was selling affiliations and selling certifications. And a poorly run gym would get to a spot where it would have 100, 120 people. You would have some coaches helping you. Nobody was making any money, either the gym or the coaches. And these coaches would say, man, I could go stand up a box and I could get 100 people, and 100 people to $100 a month. That's 10 grand a month. I'll be rolling in dough. Like clearly the guys who run this gym are just being dicks, and they're not, spreading the largesse around.
Right.
So that's where this geometric growth happened. And I think Greg was so prickly about discussions around quality control, because we had maybe one coach out of all the coaches we had that peeled out and stood up her own gym. And the other people, we just did them well, and the gym ran well, such that they didn't want to go anywhere, and we were pretty transparent with the books. Here's what we bring in. here's all of the costs of running the place, insurance,
Right.
everything, and then here's the profit. And we did some profit sharing with them, and we made it pretty good for everybody. But that would have been absolute poison for the then CrossFit business model. And
Sure.
from a perspective of like how rapidly they grew, I guess I can kind of appreciate that. But it also, like, Glassman is a great student of economics. He had to have known that there was a deadline on that, an endpoint
Right.
on it. But I remember him mentioning, I don't think anybody was more surprised by the success of CrossFit than Greg Glassman. And I think he
Yeah.
always expected it to crater at some point. And so there was really no thought about, like, how do we grow this thing, but grow it in a way where we maintain
Right.
quality control for everybody. And these people who are like doing second mortgages on their house to stand up a box and keep this thing open,
Yeah.
how do we really invest in them so that they've got the best chance as possible to make a go at this stuff, and they would, I don't want this to be like a CrossFit retrospective, but I remember some of they would say, well, these franchises, they don't really offer you that much. Franchises are some of the most successful businesses in the world because they've
Right.
established replicatability. When you go to do the franchise, there's also bits of shysters in it too, but you have to go through this pretty remarkable process of showing success, and you've got some best practices there. And that's all that we were suggesting. Have a beginners program, do a lot of personal training, stratify your group classes, or don't, or don't. But we never saw
Yeah.
anybody that ran it, just put the front page WOD on their chalkboard and then went with it. We never saw anybody with the revenue or the retention that we had. Not even
Sure.
close. Yeah.
The churn and burn model in fitness just doesn't work. And people don't understand. Like, I slept in my gym for like 3 years when I first opened my gym, and people don't understand how much work it is. And then
Yeah.
the system, one of my biggest failures in the gym aspect of it anyways was not having great systems in place, because that's really um the bottom line when it comes to that sort of thing. So
Yeah.
when you've got NorCal going, and when did the Paleo Solution and the podcast and the internet stuff play into that? Did that kind of develop at the same time?
Yeah. So I had forgot you had asked about that. So I really enjoyed coaching. I loved running
Yeah.
the gym, and I really loved, I mean, like, loved being a part of that CrossFit scene and going and certifying people and doing that
Yeah.
stuff. I loved it. Like, I think that was like the coolest gig in the world. I'm very grateful for having done it, but there was some really pathological stuff that was occurring on the back end. And in
Yeah.
2006, we actually de-affiliated. We sent in a letter, ironically, on September 11th, 2006, because Greg had treated some really key people, Coach Christopher Summer, who's just a wonderful human being and a brilliant guy. Like, the dude
Yeah.
speaks both Mandarin and Cantonese. He was a code breaker for the Army. He's got an advanced mathematics background. Like, he's a fucking smart dude, And
Yeah.
they were having some bickering, and you get two super smart, hard-headed guys who are both short, duking it out with each other. But I pinged Greg and I was like, hey man, can't we just bury the hatchet here? Like, Coach Summer is a great guy.
Yeah.
He's way more on board with us than not. Could you just reach out and bury the hatchet? And what he did was, in a group email, just like flamed Chris, and then had me on it. It was basically kind of like well, fuck you, kid. What are you gonna do? And I knew at that time. It took way longer. It took 20 years longer for Greg to destroy his position in this thing. But I knew the way that he treated people was going to destroy CrossFit broadly, or at least his position in CrossFit. It was going to really damage it. And that, like, post George Floyd thing was exactly this situation. But he had insulated himself over a 20-year period and only had yes men around him. And he had absolutely
Sure.
no feedback going on. But when he treated Chris that way, so awfully, I wrote a de-affiliation letter. I say, I can't be a part of this organization. I am doing this in the hopes that you will wake up to the fact that you need to treat people better. You don't have to, we can be hard-headed, we can be, go-getters, and there was some cool aspects to, very not woke elements to CrossFit early on that I think was really, really cool. But there's also this thing of like, you can't just wantonly like curb stomp people. Like, this is going to end badly. So there was a bunch of drama around that. They told all kinds of stories about us, but our business continued to grow, and we started to work with Greg Everett, and we had launched this thing called the Performance Menu magazine, and it was really getting some legs. And we were ourselves noodling on the idea of creating an alternate certification path and really offering like a business path. And I think Greg was savvy to that. And then I think he wanted to cut that off, but he also, CrossFit had grown to a spot where Greg could not be multiple places at once, clearly, but he was still the main person running the certifications that were occurring. But they had grown enough. This was maybe 2008. They had grown enough that they wanted to do more than one certification a weekend. And at that time, I was kind of like the only person that understood both the CrossFit methodology, but had a good enough personality and also like a strength and conditioning background that I could be like the head guy running those things. So I did that for probably 6 months, 8 months, and then they offered for me to do the CrossFit nutrition cert, which I did that, and I love that stuff. Like, that was a ton of fun for me.
You're a great teacher. You're a wonderful teacher.
Thank you. Yeah, but then we had that Black Box Summit thing where we had folks get together, trying to do best practices, and HQ freaked out. They just lost their minds, and I don't know if I quit or was kicked out. Like, I'm not sure which thing communicated through, but the long and short of it is that was the end of my tenure with CrossFit. And the kind of the interesting thing about that is that I had thought about a book for quite some time, but Greg, when you work with CrossFit, he keeps you busy enough, and he keeps you provoked enough that you can never sit down and kind of like collect your thoughts and get anything going, which I think was kind of a strategy on his part, because he didn't want anybody, Starrett, Wellborn, any of the other kind of notable people in there, to stand up their own thing. And so when we were, fully and thoroughly out, that's when I sat down and basically took all of the curriculum that I'd been using in that Paleo Solution certification or seminar, and put that into a book format. And what was really cool about that is that if I had written that book 2 years before, the benefit of doing it 2 years later than what I initially thought I was going to do is I had all this dialogue with people, thousands and thousands of interactions. And so instead of me just writing this thing in kind of a vacuum, I had done hundreds of 8-hour lectures, and had all these questions from people. So it was like I would write one section and I knew what the questions would be about it, and I would incorporate that into the next section. I had some pretty good humor wrapped into it. Most of it wouldn't make the cut in today's society, but it was kind of like the right place, the right time. I had built, we started my website, robbwolf.com, late 2006, early 2007, I want to say. And so we had never sold anything. I just wrote a lot. We started the podcast right around 2009, 2010, mainly to support the book, but it was also, I received so many questions that the podcast was an easier place to address that stuff. And so the podcast originally was kind of a Q&A format, and eventually it turned into like an interview format like everybody does. And now we've morphed back around to mainly doing a Q&A format. There was a time where we were like we intermittently like #1 health podcasts and stuff like that. We're absolutely like bottom of the barrel now, but we just don't do a lot with it. And there are a lot of really good people out there.
Six listeners can't be wrong, Rob. So I don't know if you're breaking up or I'm breaking up, but let me see here.
You were breaking up a smidge. Yeah.
Oh, you're back now. Okay. So 6 listeners can't be wrong, Rob. I think the main thing out of that whole thing is that, for guys, especially over 40 that are having some personal issues, whether business related or usually, and this has been the same in my life, when one door closes, another one opens. If you're willing to actually keep an open mind
Yeah.
and move forward. Because, like you're part of this big thing called CrossFit. A lot of people, if they were shut out of that, and the cool thing about CrossFit is when you got kicked out, the number of people that were on that list, like what Dan John was on that list,
Yeah.
Ripito was on that list. Like you go down that list of people that were shunned out of there, like that's some pretty prominent, that's a really good list to be on.
Yeah.
If you're on that list of people that got kicked out, um, that's a pretty good company to be with. So
Yeah.
you got this podcast, it's rocking, it's rolling. Your internet business is rocking and rolling. When did you decide you just didn't want to be part of the gym business anymore? Like,
Oh
what made you
gosh.
kind of decide that?
Yeah, Nikki and I were kind of ready to do something different, and then my brother and sister-in-law had run a detail shop, and they did a really good job with it, but they were burned out on that, and they
Yeah.
became members of the gym. And my
Mhm.
brother-in-law Sean was like a third in state wrestler and had a good movement and strength and conditioning background, and he's so amazing because like Nikki and I had to be a team. Like she did the back end, I did the front end for the most part. There was a little overlap there. But
Sure.
Sean is amazing. He's super gregarious, great coach, very people oriented, and like he can fly a spreadsheet like nobody else. Like he had really great skills with that. And so they just started taking over more elements of the day-to-day functioning. Then we were like, hey man, what do you think about buying us out? The way we'll have you buy us out is if we maintain or exceed these revenue goals, then basically over a 4 to 6 year period, each year you will vest 10% of the business. So it was like Nikki
Yeah.
and I were able to passively get some money out of it. That way they were incentivized to keep the gym running well, but they didn't have to come up with a chunk of money up front. Like I think that like passive
Yeah.
income is great because you don't get taxed as hard on it usually
Sure.
versus getting a big chunk. And they did a remarkable job with that. They really, we had set up some great systems, but they took it to a whole other level. They had some great people like Sarah and Grayson Strange come on staff,
Yeah.
and they're just amazing, wonderful people, great coaches. And that thing was just crushing it up until about 2015-ish, maybe not that late, 2014. But the commoditization of the brick and mortar gym just made it very difficult to run these things because we were surrounded within a quarter mile, half mile of our location were maybe like 6 other similar gyms, clearly not run as well. But I remember seeing as little as like $55 a month for unlimited classes. And it was like
And
one dude who,
Planet,
yeah,
and Planet Fitness just totally threw a huge hand grenade at things. And if you don't have the ability, when all these different places are popping up, if you're not really an exceptional coach and you have these personal relationships with people, it's very difficult to keep going, especially if you start competing on price.
yeah, yeah,
Anytime that happens, you have to compete on exclusivity and expertise and getting results, because competing on price is a one-way ticket to the outhouse,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
So, and that's wonderful that most people that get out of the gym business, it's kind of like they jump out of the plane and hope the parachute opens.
right.
It's nice that you had a nice settlement on that. So you basically transitioned, and I know Nikki had kind of helped open up. I guess it was Pike 13 eventually, or
Yep.
I can't remember. I used that software for my gym for a number of years. It was very simple, very great. So she was kind of involved in that. I know she was involved in that. And then, so at what point, like you're just rocking it? You've got the bestseller, you've got one of the number one rated podcast. Your website is like showing up number one on Google. I know there was a point there where things just kind of went kafooey,
Yeah.
um, especially with a certain search engine.
Yeah.
If you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, we never went to the well too often as far as selling stuff to people. We did some
Yeah.
affiliate things. I had the book. I ended up writing a second book, Wired to Eat, which also fortunately did pretty well. But we didn't go to the well a ton. I made this one program called the Keto Master Class that I still think is just a phenomenal resource. Walks people through the ketogenic diet process, and it even helps you assess like maybe a ketogenic diet isn't the right fit for you. It was really good.
Sure.
And man, we sold the pants off of that thing. We did really, really well with it. And then there was like a day in 2018, I got this, it was really weird. I had like a text from both Mark Sisson and Chris Kresser. And this had happened maybe a time or two before, where we had all built, doing search engine optimization and stuff like that. Like 2012, this happened, but it was kind of weird. I'm like, oh, what's going on? And they're like, hey, did your site traffic just like disappear overnight? I'm like, I haven't looked yet. So I went in and looked, and like from one day to the next, the site traffic had dropped off like 97%. And this is the Google OWL update. And for years, it was clear that Google, and I mean, but when I say years, as far back as like 2012, 2013, it was pretty clear that Google wanted to control elements of like the health narrative. Like they would do preferential, you'd search on one topic and you kind of got these preferential placements for different things. Right. But where Google had created this meritocratic environment where like good people who did good material would get, ranked up the list, that just kind of went away, and it became a highly curated process. So a ton of people in the health space, and what's interesting in retrospect, there was both just kind of health, but in particular low carb, but there was also this kind of like anti-vax scene, which that's a whole other topic, and maybe we talk about that at some other point. But all of those people got put on this kind of naughty list, and our ability to sell anything on Facebook basically disappeared. Like where we had a return on ad spend that was really good, it became impossible to make $1 on that. And then the site, our ability to be found, where before if somebody put in like CrossFit, type 1 diabetes, I had several articles on it. It was just hundreds and hundreds of articles that we had great placement on. Those articles were still there, but unless you put in like robbwolf.com, the exact URL, you couldn't find the stuff at all. Yeah. And so we were really kind of high and dry. I was like, I don't know what we're going to do here. Fortunately, we've always really lived well within our means, and we've done some investing in different things. But I really question whether or not I would stay in this space, because it's like, dude, if Google and Facebook want to like take me down, like how the fuck am I going to compete with that? But right. I'm also feisty, and I kind of wanted to give things one more go. And I'd been curious about Texas. So we were living in Reno. We'd been in Reno for the better part of a decade there. And I had been curious about Texas for a variety of reasons, both, central time zone, so I could travel east-west easier and get back and have a bigger, better airport and all that stuff. So we sold our house, which we had fortunately bought the house at a good time, sold it at a very good time. And we took that money and moved cross-country. And this is where we founded LMNT. Like we took the money out of that and stood up LMNT. A good friend of mine, Dave Dooley, started this insurance product that is basically gap insurance on Social Security and pensions. And I'm not involved in the day-to-day running of that business, but I was an early, investor in that. And we did a bunch of different things like that. And so, very midlife. Uprooted the family, pulled money out of our home, started the Healthy Rebellion, which was a private online community, continued paying our employees to help build that community. We ran the Healthy Rebellion for a good 3 years, and then it reached a point where I was busy enough with other stuff that I didn't feel comfortable charging people for the Healthy Rebellion, but I still wanted it to exist. So we basically made it closed more or less to new people. We still let new people in, but you had to like donate $1 or $100 or whatever you wanted to like Diana Rogers,
Sure.
501(c), usually some sort of sustainability 501(c). So that thing still is marching along, but that was a super hairball period of time where like I'm living on savings. We pulled this money out of our previous home. We moved to a spot where we didn't know hardly anybody.
Yeah.
Fortunately, because of paleo and CrossFit and stuff like that, we had some people that knew us and we built some community and whatnot. But it was stressful, man. Like 2 kids, wife, living on savings to stand up some new businesses. But I did have in the back of my head, like, one good thing that Nikki and I have done over the course of our tenure together, like when we were growing the gym, we set some benchmarks. We were like, if we don't get to this revenue by this date, we're going to close the gym. So it wasn't just that we were going to infinitely grind away at this thing,
Yeah.
but we would create some, we want to make this much money. We want this standard of living. And so we did some things like that. And that's what we did in this circumstance. If that had all gone ass up, I might have gone and gotten like a physician assistant, certification or something like that, and worked at like a HRT clinic and, just called it a day and shut down all my social media stuff. But fortunately, like LMNT has done really well. Some of these other businesses that we were early with, like Thrive Market and Kettle and Fire and stuff like that, have continued to do well. And so that's kind of been this long arc on the entrepreneurial side. I've been lucky that both Nikki and I have similar takes on like frugality and investing, sacrificing for today for hopefully a better tomorrow. Like we've been really, really lucky that we're both very well aligned in that regard. And also we've been reasonably risk tolerant. Like we have friends that were both police officers or like police officer and work for the county and stuff like that. And they've just always had a guaranteed gig. And when they learned that like we might write a book and then largely live off of the royalties of that book for like 3 years while we spun up other things, they were like, oh my God, I just couldn't even imagine that, so that is kind of the long arc of this stuff. And we've been, on paper, it looks good. It looks pretty successful. We've had a good run at that stuff, but it's been a lot of hard work and definitely being willing to pivot and modify, being willing to burn everything down. If that's really like, if we're done, then we're done. Yeah.
Yeah, I talk to people all the time, and it speaks highly of Nikki and your guys' relationship, because a lot of women in that situation, when things start going squirrely, they just bail, they're gone, or if you're not on the same page, financially, a lot of people's marriages end because of finances, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that says a lot about your relationship, and I think a lot of people have bought into this like narrative that happiness is the reason you live. Happiness is something you experience, enjoy along the way, but that's not the sole purpose. And you've got this long-term purpose. And I think one of the reasons you've been so successful over the years, and I've followed you for a long time, I've been lucky enough to be on your show a couple times. You don't sell like some of these people, and God bless them, they're internet marketers, they're whatever. Every day I'm getting a different email selling something different.
Right.
So I know you're only going to sell something that you generally think is helpful, and you're not just going to sell everything that comes across. If Robb Wolf sends out an email, and that's one of the nice things, the things that go against stuff like Google is having that email list.
Yeah.
It's so important to have that email list, because you can run a business off just an email list if you're smart. You put out a quality product, you don't shove it down people's throats, you have a fair price, you treat people well. And that goes, that pays dividends over years. You're getting to the point now where people are just so tired of having their email inbox blown up with sales emails and ads on these different platforms that people see it's an ad, they don't even look at it anymore. They just flip through it, right? So I think the way you've treated people over the long haul has been awesome. And obviously, you're welcome. Obviously, your ability to pivot, and I think a lot of people get set on one way of doing things, and you've kind of just flowed with the flow. And I think people kind of misunderstand that, like, life's not going to be easy. If you accept the fact that this is going to be difficult, there's going to be good times, there's going to be bad times, it makes it a lot easier. Let's talk a little bit about you. You've gotten back into coaching now, so
Yep.
let's talk about the transition from being an operator to an owner, and then let's talk about your relationship with jujitsu. And obviously, you're not coaching jujitsu to make a living. You're doing
Right.
it because you love it. Right?
Yeah.
And that's really cool. So let's talk about, like, your mindset shift from, like, what it's like going from an operator who's doing seminars, who's working in the gym, to being an owner investor, and then scratching that soul, or that, giving back part of you, and incorporating that into your life as well.
Yeah. Like I was very used to my reason for being was like content generation, blogs and podcasts and all that. And I still do a little bit of that, but I'm valuable now to, like, I'm on a number of advisory boards for different startups and stuff like that. And occasionally
Cool.
I'll write a piece, occasionally I'll do a blog piece or I'll do a research piece. But more often than not, like when a problem pops up or, potential opportunity arises, then it's that like 25 years of experience being in this space. And to some degree also the, still decent goodwill that I've cultivated that I end up bringing into that. And it took a while to get used to that. Like
Sure.
some weeks I don't do a ton, I'll read and research and stuff like that. And I'm maybe, working on some material, but, like with Element in particular, long-term planning, making sure our supply chain is all buttoned up, all kinds of stuff like that. That was really, really different. And then surrounding myself with people that are really crackerjack at the stuff that they do, so that I think about myself almost like a precision blasting expert. Like you're putting a tunnel through a mountain. You got to take this one chunk of rock out. If you do it wrong, the whole thing collapses. And so
Sure.
I think there's a saying: you don't pay certain people for the hour they spent doing it. You pay them for the 25 years, of experience that
Right.
they have. So that's definitely been a big transition for me. But it was weird at first. Like it felt
Mhm.
a little naked and odd that I wasn't just like generating content all the time. But it's a really different headspace to think strategically and kind of long-term plan. And but it's been good. It's been good, and I've had a really phenomenal team that I've been able to plug into. And then on the jujitsu side, like the jujitsu is just a kind of a lifelong love that I've had. I did my first class in 1993, but I didn't do another class
Mhm.
until like 2004. And there's been very big gaps in between. The last 12 years have been pretty consistent, and I just got my black belt about a month and a half, 2 months ago now, and was doing a little bit of coaching intermittently, but I've really committed to doing 2 days a week of a what's called a CAP class, the Combat Athlete Program, which is where after folks, again, like Straight Blast Gym, the organization I'm part of, they do a beginning program. It's called Foundations. There's 18
Yeah.
classes. They rotate people through those 18 classes. If you're a good mover, maybe you did some wrestling and you get stuff figured out in 18 classes, then you graduate into the CAP program. When you graduate into CAP, you do 3 roles with a black belt so that we can show you some of the etiquette and the pacing, and like you don't have to go pell mell on this thing. Like, slower is better and all that type of stuff. And then they get plugged into the main class. Um, SBG, I think, is really phenomenal again because it's got that dedicated beginners program. We've got the CAP program, which is really comprehensive, and it covers everything from sport jujitsu to self-defense. We try to lean into jujitsu that could work for all of those things, but we will, like
Mhm.
some things work really well for sport, and you wouldn't want to do it on, self-defense, and some self-defense things are not really optimal for sport jiu-jitsu, but we try to, keep a finger in all of those pies. And, the well-run gyms, we are constantly trying to get people to relax, slow down, and the new guys, big, strong, athletic guys, it's challenging to do, but that's really part of the gym culture so that people are safe. You can train with almost anybody. We have comp team classes, and at comp team, you fucking get after it. Like you got somebody the same age, same weight, same physical attributes, hopefully similar skill set, and we grade that training. But it's like, okay, yeah, you are trying to win today versus training, which 90% of what we do, we're trying to do non-attribute training. If you're strong and explosive and everything, great. Try not to be. Try to use 40% of your reserve instead of 90% of your reserve, because when you train that way, and you mentioned this before we started recording, the Eastern Bloc grapplers, whether it's Sambo or Judo or Greco or whatever, they get this. Like so much of their training is like smooth and gentle, and then they get in and pressure test it, and they're not beat to death all the time. The American kind of Dan Gable grappling view is just
you mean the CrossFit way of training?
Kind of the CrossFit way of doing this stuff, hard mofos, but
the clown.
Yeah. Hey, Jim, I think this thing stopped. I think you're recording.
No, we're still recording.
Okay.
We're going to my end. Yeah.
Sure.
You got about
it is.
10 minutes.
There we go. Okay.
No problem.
But yeah, so it's really a ton of fun to coach. Like I think one does not really understand a topic like that until you get in and coach it, whether it's firearms or astronomy or whatever. Like you have a certain degree of understanding when it's just your own study, but then when you need to share this information with lots of different people, bigger, smaller, older, younger, and figure out how to get a message that kind of hits the main standard deviation, but then also be able to accommodate people at the fringes. It really elevates your game, and I thoroughly love it. Like I don't get up super early to do that, but it's a little early, and I'm a little tired going in, but I'm full of piss and vinegar on the way out. Like thoroughly enjoy it. Yeah.
One of the things I've noticed over the years, I'm sure Coach Summer would agree with this, and many of the other, guys like Wellborn, the best athletes that I've seen do the basics better than anyone else.
Yeah.
Hands down. That they make the basics look effortless, and they master the basics, and they can do the basics blindfolded, backwards, forwards, upside down. So it only makes sense, no matter what the sport or the skill level, you would start with the basic and fundamentals, and you would work on those, and you would review them obsessively from time to time. Like I remember people like Teddy Bruschi, I remember talking to him about how, it's the week of the Super Bowl and they're doing tackling drills the week before the Super Bowl, like basic how to tackle. It's like, it's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. And, and with training too, like we've had numerous conversations about the vast majority of your training needs to be between like 55 and 75%. And then you only go to that maybe 10% of the time.
Yeah.
And if people still they have a really, really hard time grasping that concept. And I was very lucky to have some great wrestling coaches that really taught me how to train well. And it's really hard to find a good mixed martial arts or jiu-jitsu gym where people are just not trying to kill each other.
Yeah.
So that's if you go into a mixed martial arts gym and they throw you in with some dude and he tries to put you in an arm bar on the first day, that's probably you need to go somewhere else.
Yeah, I mean,
just
really quickly, when you're fishing around for gyms, I would look and see, do they have morning, noon, and night classes? Do they have a women's class?
Yes.
When you go into a class, do they have a spectrum of ages? Do they have both men and women training for the most part? And even if you really aspire to be a top level competitor, a well-run facility will still facilitate that, because there's always the comp team, there's always the other times to do that. But at a minimum, something to keep in mind is that a well-run gym will be there the next day that you come to train. A really poorly run gym, chances are you show up and they've got we're evicted. Now we're going to train out of our garage and stuff like that. So it's
half of our people are in jail or in prison. That's not a good sign either.
Yeah.
The one gym I trained at in Lexington, they actually had there was a shooting in the gym, and the gym was shut down. So it's like I might need to find a new one. But
that would make it tough to train.
The other thing, can the coaches adapt the style to the person they're working with? I had a young coach reach out to me, and he's like, I'm sick and tired of doing the same thing and asking this, the same question over and over again. It's like, I look at it like this, that same question, I'm getting an opportunity to explain it in a different way every single time, because everybody's going to need a different explanation. And some people need to see it hands-on. Some people need to hear it. Some people need to feel it. Some people need to feel what it's like to sink that hip in on a hip toss, right? They need to feel that. And other people can look at it. Other people can tell and listen to what you say and nail it. And so you, as a coach, it's your job to figure out what you need to do to communicate that. And I'm glad you get to experience that again, because there's nothing like being a mentor to people. It's a great experience, especially if you just accept the fact that the results and the outcome is on them and you're the guide. I mean, a lot of people get in trouble in coaching is when they basically base their self-worth on the person's outcome.
Right.
Now you get yourself in trouble. But if you're just truly doing it as being a teacher and a guide, and it's the client's job to kind of figure it out, then it becomes very, very liberating, because even when they win, even when they lose, you still don't, like, it's not a big roller coaster. So that's just my take on it anyways. To wrap this thing up, Rob, what advice would you give somebody who's, 40, 50, 60 years old? Maybe they've let themselves go, their health, they've got a health crisis, they're overweight, they got diabetes, or, they're going through a divorce, or they're having to pivot in their business. What would you say to somebody like that at that stage in their life? Just a few tips and advice to get them into a better place.
Man, one, I've been there and I feel for folks with that. Like I really do, particularly being like the man of the house and, kind of the steward or shepherd of things. It can be crushing. So yes. I do think that looking back around and just, finding your why, like, why am I doing this at all? And it really harkens back to what you were just saying. On the one hand, we have ego and we need some ego to be able to navigate the world. But I have kids, and so I'm doing this for my kids. I want a better world. I want a better opportunity for them. I really, like dipping my toe into the sustainability thing. Like I can be a dick at times, but I really do like people and I like the world. I want the world to be a better place. And when I'm dead or when I'm on the way out, I like to be like, did I make the world a better place? And maybe this, little sacred cow book facilitates some of that, and helping people just live better so they can be there for their friends and family and community and all that type of stuff. So finding some sort of a why, and some sort of a why that isn't like egocentric, because it will be there. I wish I was religious. I really do, because I feel like, that belief that someone or something is there with you and it's got a plan and a mission. I've just never felt anything like that. So the closest thing I've been able to cobble together along that line is this, like, the belief in making the world a better place, and having my why. And so you can be tired and exhausted and like questioning whether or not you're a fucking idiot and everything. Like, well, I might be an idiot and I am tired, but I'm still going to motor forward because of this thing. And that has really sustained me. And I've also been really, really lucky in the relationship that I've had with Nikki. Like, she was a 1 in a million person. I got really lucky. We've had great communication. We've had some rocky parts because the gears meshed well. They didn't mesh perfectly, and there were some hard conversations over certain topics. But there were some things that I really needed to work on that she called out with me, and vice versa. And we were both willing to put in the work to do it, because shit, man, I don't care what age you are, like the dating scene sucks, at least in the United States. Like, I wouldn't want to be a part of that at all. And so whatever you've got is probably better than whatever perceived option you've got out there, just if nothing else because of history and shared experience and stuff like that. So I guess another bit of advice is like, if you can mend or heal relationships, do it. If the relationship is broken and toxic, then like make a clean break and be done for sure. But we had some rough spots. We went through some tough things, but we both have. I will pat us on the back. We've been pretty brave about both articulating, like, "Hey, I don't like this," or "I'm challenged by what," and then the other person being like, "Okay, I hear that, and I agree, or maybe even I disagree, but like, here's how I'm going to work on that to try to bring this to be."
I will say this about your wife: she's one of the most brutally honest people I've ever met.
Yes, she is.
Which can be a very harsh attribute, but for me, I'd rather know than be guessing.
Yeah.
So it's if you know what you're dealing with, it's a lot better. But I know you have to get off the phone here, or the call, or whatever this is. So, but thank you very much for being here. I appreciate you being on the show, and I hope you have yourself a wonderful day. And I look forward to chatting with you again.
Thanks, man. Take care.
You too.